Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing great. I'm doing fine, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me today for part 4 of our story. Isn't it getting so exciting? Because we have a couple here desperate for money, accepting $300,000 from an unknown source in order to bury a body on their land. And they don't know whether this is going to have recriminations or not, and you're about to find out. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And if you haven't heard part 1, part 2 or part 3 of the story, you really must, because to have a good story you need to have every component. You need to understand the characters and be able to relate to the people in the story. That's what the story's all about. So let's continue, shall we, with part 4 of our story. Prim had almost forgotten how much she'd eaten earlier on in the afternoon. She began to busy herself in the kitchen, making their dinner. She brought the dinner trays into the living room. She had made the couple toasted tuna melts, French fries and Greek salad. She filled 2 large glasses with Diet Cola and ice. As they sat comfortably watching the television together, with trays perched on their laps and the ice in their frosted glasses tinkling, Big Bear switched on the news, as he did every evening as a matter of routine. "Breaking news," said the news anchor. "Eliza Kennington went missing over 3 days ago. Her parents are very concerned as to her whereabouts. The teenager who was working as a waitress at the Ribs and Rack all-night diner was seen leaving the diner at 2 a.m. in the morning, and one of her colleagues that works here at the diner witnessed Eliza getting into a strange man's truck. The man had a long black beard. Can you tell us what you saw?" said the news anchor, placing a mic in the young waitress's flustered face. "Oh my God, that diner is 20 minutes away from us," said Prim, turning up the volume of the television control, her eyes focused on the screen, her face growing as white as a lily. "Well, I've known Eliza for years," said the girl, sniffing, as tears spilled down her cheeks, which she wiped away with the back of her sleeve, realizing that she was on camera, and she didn't want to embarrass herself. "We were leaving the diner for the night, after working on the late shift. There had been a handful of customers. The manager said we should go. Our manager, Mr. Watkins, is kind like that. He could see there were no patrons in the diner to be served. It was a very quiet night, you see, so he let us go early. I was really grateful. We were both dead beat. It takes a lot out of you working these crazy hours, but we get double pay working late at night, and the tips can be especially good after our patrons have come back from a bar and are a bit bladdered. When you're busy, things go fast at the diner, but this night it just seemed to drag on and on. There was not much work to do. I told Eliza I'd give her a lift back home in my truck, because we don't live particularly far from each other. We've been working at the diner together for over 6 months. I always take her home in my car as a matter of routine. Eliza was saving her money up to buy her own car. She told me she'd be waiting for me outside the diner, because she wanted to have a smoke. I had to finish wiping down a few tables that were a bit dirty. The manager was still in the bar cleaning away some glasses, talking to the chef. They were arguing about spaghetti. I do remember that. The manager was saying that the chef's, makes the spaghetti is not cooked enough, I suppose, and the chef told him that pasta needed to be al dente or it was overcooked and wasn't the way the Italians cook it, something like that. I came out of the diner to see Eliza getting into this truck with a man who was sitting behind the wheel. I do remember he had a long black beard, a thick beard. I was calling after her. I think I said, "Eliza, Eliza. I thought I was giving you a lift. What are you doing?" But she ignored me. She didn't even turn around to even acknowledge me. And that is weird behaviour for her. She got into the truck and they drove away. That driver, I think he was behaving suspiciously. I'm not an expert, but he put his foot down on the accelerator and bolted out of the parking bay. And no one has heard from my friend ever since. I know something's not right. Eliza's always posting stuff on social media, Facebook and stuff like that. But she hasn't been posting anything. She hasn't even responded to any of my calls, and that's not like her. She'd never get into a strange truck like this. I'm very concerned that the man in the truck meant to harm her. Maybe he was holding her at gunpoint. That might explain why she didn't look back at me. I don't know, but something is terribly wrong. The police found Eliza's purse with her ID and her money scattered further down the road. I did hear that. It's as if it has been tossed out of a truck window. And when I learnt that, it scared the hell out of me. I think something really bad has happened to my best friend, said the young woman, who began to whimper. I'm sure this is terribly hard for you, but it might help our listeners if you could tell us anything about this truck you saw, asked the news anchor, and the man driving it. Someone listening might know who he is, if you give our viewers a good description of him. The young teenager shook her head sorrowfully. I told you, it was dark. It was early in the morning, very early. I was tired, not really concentrating. It's hard, you see. Everything happened so quickly. I do remember it was a large truck. That's right, it was a large truck, and I think it was red in colour. But I can't be sure. Perhaps you could describe the man you saw more clearly. I've never seen him before a day in my life. I wouldn't remember a face like that. I mean, it was distinctive. I do remember he was glaring at me. I think he was upset because I'd seen him. He was wearing a red and black plaid jacket. That's right, a red and plaid jacket. I think he had a narrow face. It might have looked more narrow because he had a very long beard. But that's all. I do think his skin wasn't great, but it was hard to tell. He might have had pockmarks from old acne scars, unless the lighting just gave me that impression. I remember there was something so insidious about the whole thing. I knew something was wrong. I went straight back in the bar to tell Mr. Watkins, the manager, what I'd seen. He told me that Eliza could have taken a lift from a friend, that I shouldn't worry about it. But I knew Eliza didn't willy-nilly accept lift from strangers. I had this nauseous feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake off. I told myself I was being silly and that Mr. Watkins was right. But I sent her some texts, and Eliza never responded to any of them. And that is odd. She always answers her cell. I was so tired when I got back home. I passed out, didn't give the matter much more thought. Then her parents phoned me the very next morning to say that Eliza had never returned home from her stint at the Rack and Ribs diner. I felt so bad. I felt I'd let my friend down. I should have done something. I should have called the police. I'm so scared that that monster who gave her a lift has harmed my best friend. What if Eliza is, I don't want to say the word, but you know what I mean. When people are abducted, bad things happen, don't they? The young woman burst into tears, and someone ran over to her and began to comfort her. The next thing is the news anchor was interviewing Eliza's parents. The couple looked absolutely distraught. The mother had big black bags under her eyes. Her face was ashen, as if all the colour had been stolen from her skin. And even though she was wearing some lipstick, it did absolutely nothing to reduce her melancholia, but positively highlighted all the blotches on her face. Mrs. Kennington, I really appreciate you speaking to us. I know this must be very distressing for you. But are you sure that Eliza might not have deliberately chosen to leave home? I mean, teenagers are notorious for getting up to all kinds of shenanigans, as we well know. How do you know that this young man who spirited your daughter away might not be a boyfriend of sorts? Maybe she wanted to run away with him. How are things back at home? The woman frowned, blowing her nose hard into a handkerchief, and furiously shaking her head. Never! Not my daughter. She'd never ever run away. She's not like that, you know. I know my daughter, said Mrs. Kennington. She was a homebody. Very prudent young lady, sensible, reliable, punctual. She never did drugs, nor did she drink, although she did smoke. That was her only vice. My daughter doesn't have a boyfriend. She's focusing on her studies. She's not a great socializer either. But something has happened to her. She's been abducted by this awful man. I know she has. My daughter would never ever get into a stranger's truck. She's very weary about that kind of thing. I told her not to work at the diner, said Mrs. Kennington, bursting into uncontrolled sobs. I knew it was a bad idea. I mean, at that time of night, anything can happen. And I'm sorry, but the world is getting to be a dark place these days. It's not as safe as it was when I was a little girl. And I blame it on those computer games young people expose themselves to these days. It makes some of our kids very dark. The choices they make are terrible. I told Eliza that I didn't have a good feeling about any of this. But she insisted on taking the job at the diner. She told me I was being ridiculous and far too overprotective of her. She'd be absolutely fine. But now she's gone. And her purse was discarded further down the road. Explain that to me. My daughter would never abandon her purse and money. Money was still in her wallet. This whole wretched business reeks of foul play. My daughter has been abducted by a monster, whoever he is, and he might have harmed her. Someone out there knows exactly what has happened. I do appreciate what you've been through, Mrs. Kennington. This is a dreadful thing that you've been through. I can't imagine as a mother what you must be feeling like. Do you have a message for this person who may possibly have abducted your daughter? Yes, I do. I am begging you, said Mrs. Kennington, her eyes filling with tears. Please let my daughter go. Please don't harm her. She's a very good girl with a wonderful heart. I beg you, don't hurt her. I can't sleep, I can't rest until I know what's happened to my baby. Please send her home to us. Please don't hurt her. Mr. Kennington stood there very soberly. His face, much like his wife's, was ashen. The anchor asked him if he had anything to say. Yes, I do have something to say. I would like to say that someone out there knows exactly what happened to my daughter. And if you know and you do nothing about it, then shame on you. You need to contact the police at once. Maybe someone out there knows who this mysterious man with the long black beard is, who gave my daughter a lift in his red truck. My daughter's friend has given you a great description of this man. A police artist has done a drawing. Please look at the pictures on your screen and see if it triggers any bells. Do you recognize this man? You could be potentially saving my daughter's life. If you know anything, I beg you to come forward, to have a heart, to contact the police, to do your civic duty. Our lives at the moment are a living hell, worrying about the whereabouts of our beloved daughter. I do not have a good feeling about this whole thing. I'm pleading the public to help me. I regret not listening to my wife. I thought it would be healthy for my daughter to be earning her own money. We're supposed to encourage our children to become independent. But I never predicted any of this happening. Not for a second. Soon the news anchor was interviewing the manager of the diner, Mr. Watkins, who was looking very uncomfortable to have a microphone shoved in his face. Mr. Watkins, I understand you manage the Rack and Rib Diner. I'm standing where the truck actually arrived outside this diner. This is the location where the truck was seen. And this is exactly the position where I'm standing now, where Eliza was seen getting into the red truck. It's very good for you to speak to us, Mr. Watkins. I appreciate it so much. Can you describe your waitress, Eliza Kennington, to our listeners? Yes, indeed I can. Now, she was a very good girl, was Eliza.
Quiet, hard-working. She's been at the diner now for 6 months. Very reliable young lady. You don't get many as good as her. She never once arrived to work late, and is always attentive and friendly to all our customers. Nobody has ever had a bad word to say about her. Eliza's got lots of friends. Many of our patrons know her. I thought she'd accepted a lift from one of them. But this mysterious man with the long black beard, driving a red truck, I don't actually know anyone fitting that description. But much like Eliza's father, I would say call the police if you know someone fitting that profile, or someone who's suddenly shaved off his dark beard.
Mr. Watkins, I'm sure our listeners would like to know how Eliza was behaving on the evening she accepted a lift from this truck driver. I assume you know your staff well. Did you notice anything different that stood out to you about Eliza? Did she seem nervous, excited, worried about something perhaps?
No, not really. Nothing stood out as if, not normal. I mean, she was in a good mood, said Mr. Watkins. But then again, she was an upbeat teenager, so her behaviour wasn't unusual. I know she's accepted lifts from patrons in the past, so when I heard she'd got into a red truck with someone, I really wasn't worried. She's a clever girl. I thought she'd taken a lift with someone she knew, but it seems I got that horribly wrong.
I'm here outside the diner, where Eliza Kennington got into a red truck at 2 a.m. in the morning. If you have any idea who this—
I am sorry, Big Bear, but I can't listen to any of this any more,
said Prim, throwing her tray of uneaten food onto the coffee table and dashing over to her husband's side, grabbing the remote control from his tray. She switched the television off sharply, her eyes swimming with tears. For a moment she stood there staring at Big Bear. Her whole body began to shake like a leaf.
"What the hell is the matter, Prim?" asked Big Bear, shocked by his wife's demeanour and her reaction to the news brief. "Why did you switch the television off like that?"
"Don't you get it, Big Bear? Wake up, will you? Smell the coffee, for goodness sake. Oh, my God, Big Bear, what have we done?"
said Prim, waving her arm in the air frantically. Prim's face had become as white as a sheet. Her eyes grew round. She focused on her husband, her voice becoming like a cautionary whisper, as if she was afraid that the walls of the Pink Lady might take offence to what she had to say.
I think the body that is buried here on our land, I think it belongs to Eliza Kennington, the man who abducted her, with the long black beard. He buried her on our property. I know he did. He's the man that phoned us, the one that paid us $300,000 in cash to cover up his macabre crime, to ensure he never got caught. I mean, what better way to conceal your wicked deed than burying it on a private property? We've helped a vindictive murderer, Big Bear, cover up his crime, when he wants locking up in a state penitentiary and never seeing the light of day ever again. What have we done, Big Bear? What have we done?
Big Bear looked dismayed. He rubbed his chin.
"Don't be ridiculous, Prim. You're barking up the wrong tree. There is no way the body buried on our land is that of Eliza Kennington. Besides, they don't even know if the young lady is dead. It's all just speculation at the moment. For all you know, the man in the truck may indeed be a boyfriend that she met online, that she was clandestinely choosing to meet. It happens all the time. She's a teenager, for goodness sake. They're notorious for doing things like this. And even though her parents claim to know their daughter well, do they really? Half the time parents have no idea what their children get up to."
"Oh, come on, Big Bear. You heard her mother. She's a prudent young lady. Of course she's dead. Everyone knows that. They're just not saying it. You could see that even her mother knew her daughter is no longer alive. A mother knows, Big Bear. Do the math. Eliza Kennington vanishes in our neck of the woods around the time we get a mysterious phone call. offering us $300,000 in cash for the privilege of burying a deceased body on our land. All this happens at the same time that Eliza goes missing. I'm sorry, Big Bear. The coincidences are far too remarkable. They rarely are. Do you know what Great-Uncle Walter used to tell me? He said, Prim, there is no such thing as coincidence. And he's absolutely right. The young girl, Eliza, gets into a red truck, and then she's never seen again. I'm telling you, Big Bear, we should never have accepted that money. How could we have been so stupid? I knew something terrible would happen. This is an absolute nightmare. I'd rather sell the Painted Lady than have to face up to all of this. We weren't thinking straight. That's what desperation does to you. You dive into the deep end with the sharks, failing to realize that you might get bitten.
We can hardly go to the police, Prim, said Big Bear. We could be accused of covering up a crime. I don't want to go to prison, and nor do you, and that's a possibility. Worse still, the police might believe we're actively involved with the disappearance of Eliza Kennington, if it is indeed her body that has been buried on our land. You know how they can twist things. My mother knew a young man who went to prison for 30 years because the police got him to confess for a crime he never committed, until the DNA proved he was innocent. I know, Big Bear. I know the police can twist things. But I cannot go to sleep knowing that that poor girl is buried on our land. Look at her parents. They're frantic as to her whereabouts. My heart broke for poor Mrs. Kennington. That woman is distraught. Her parents deserve closure, do they not? Even if it is bad news, does she not deserve to give her daughter a decent burial? And let's not kid, there could be DNA evidence on her body that could lead to an arrest of that horrible, vindictive trucker with the big black beard, don't you think? Maybe she scratched him, and there's DNA evidence under her fingernails that would lock the monster up for years and years. A man like that is likely to murder again. He needs to be stopped, Big Bear. We're letting him get away with murder. We're no better than he is. What are you saying, Prim?
I'm saying, Big Bear, we need to go and dig up the body. We can drop it off somewhere anonymously. It'll be found by the police and hopefully lead to the arrest of the perpetrator. We don't have to even get remotely involved. We drop the body in a conspicuous place and say nothing. But we cannot do nothing. How can I live with myself if Eliza Kennington is buried on our land?
Are you kidding me, Prim? You're insane. You're not thinking straight. If the man who murdered Eliza finds out the police have recovered her deceased body, he will know we are responsible for digging her up, and will likely come after us with a sawn-off shotgun, kill the both of us for betraying his trust and reneging on the deal. He has agreed to give us the money on the condition we keep Storm. If we blab about this, we could end up in grave danger, and there will likely be consequences. You must remember, Prim, this man, whoever he is, must be deranged. You need to be seriously sick in the head to murder someone. If he's killed Eliza so easily, it'll be no skin off his nose to come directly after us. We cannot disturb the body. We need to leave it be, even if it is Eliza Kennington. Do you understand, Prim? This is deadly serious.
Big Bear, I'm sorry. I don't care. I can't live with myself, knowing what I do, and seeing the Kenningtons falling apart on camera like that. I mean, it makes me just as much of a monster as the man that actually killed Eliza, if I sit back and do absolutely nothing.
Big Bear can see how anguished his wife has become. It would put the both of them in grave danger to dig up the body on their land, after they had accepted $300,000 in cash for the privilege, for he had no way of knowing if they were being clandestinely watched by the murderer.
This is not a good idea, Prim, he says, shaking his head. We need to leave the grave alone. What's done is done. We accepted the money. Let's move on from here, shall we? I think messing around with a killer, as I keep saying, and ruffling up his feathers is a very bad idea. And just supposing he's keeping tabs on us. I'm not saying he is, but supposing he is. And it is a possibility. Don't underestimate a man like this. He could be clever. He could be ahead of his game. Men like him never get caught because they're good at covering their tracks. If we mess with him, we might end up like that Eliza girl. And I don't say that lightly, Prim. I want you to understand, Prim, the gravity of what you are proposing that we both do. In theory, it sounds good enough, even reasonable, but you have no comprehension of what we are up against. It's like asking an ant to toy with an elephant. That ant is no match for an elephant. It's going to get crushed.
That man who contacted us, said Prim reflectively, he knew we had financial needs, so that we would accept the money. Maybe he has been watching us. Maybe he knows we're in debt. Maybe he has access to those computers that reveal those people who are not paying their debts on time. That could be the reason he actually contacted us.
I said he could be watching us, but I seriously doubt it, said Big Bear. I think it is unlikely. Let's face it, a lot of people would have been tempted to accept a large sum of money like this. We are no exception to that rule. Maybe he got lucky with us, took a lucky gamble that we would accept the money. But I still think that he may be clever, and we need to watch our backs. That's all I'm saying, just in case we've underestimated him. We can't be too careful.
But Big Bear, why don't you get what I'm trying to tell you? I can't possibly sleep at night knowing what I know.
Correction, Prim. You don't know anything. You're jumping to conclusions. You're being presumptuous. What do you want me to do about it, Prim?
Said Big Bear in exasperation.
We need to dig up the body, just to see if it is her, Big Bear. I need to know. I really need to know. Let's go out there in the woods tonight, dig up the grave now. Then if it is her, we can decide what needs to be done. But that mother's face on the television, it's haunting me, Big Bear. I can't get to sleep with her image in my head.
What now? You want us to go digging in the middle of the night like this? Are you insane, Prim?
Big Bear, are you listening to me or not? Can't you hear what I'm trying to tell you? We need to dig up the body now. I need to know if it's her. There is no way I can go to bed tonight not knowing the answer to that question. I need to know the truth, Big Bear. You're already saying I'm so thin. I will never ever eat again if I think the body on our land might be Eliza. Do you really want me to waste away, Big Bear? Because that's what's going to happen.
Big Bear let out a huge, resigned sigh. He knew what Prim was like. She was like a dog with a bone when she got a bee in her bonnet about something. And now he also felt a need to know if the body on their land was in fact that of Eliza Kennington. And if it was, he had no comprehension of how they would proceed. For if Eliza's killer knew what they were doing, they could potentially have put themselves into serious danger. But he knew he needed to appease his wife. If Prim lost any more weight, she'd be a walking skeleton. He knew she had him by the short and curlies. He'd have to do what she asked. It must have been at about 10 minutes past midnight when the couple left Heathcliff behind the closed doors of the Painted Lady. And he was not a happy camper. Heathcliff was not impressed, realizing that he was going to be discluded from this nightly adventure. The highly intelligent Labrador sensed something was up, and that his owners had been behaving strangely since they returned from town in the late afternoon. When they left the Painted Lady, they could hear him scratching at the front door and whimpering sorrowfully to himself. Prim was sad to leave him behind, but had decided it was not wise to bring him along, given how excited he had been earlier on in the afternoon, when he'd uncovered the grave site. There was no telling how he'd react when they began digging up the grave, so bringing him along for the ride was not a sensible decision. There was a cool breeze blowing that night, which was why both Big Bear and Prim were sensibly dressed, wearing sweaters and sneakers. But Big Bear would likely be working up quite a sweat when he dug up the grave, and would no doubt warm up considerably. But the job should not be terribly difficult, since the gravedigger had already loosened up all the soil. Big Bear was carrying a large trowel in his hands, and they were both wearing head torches, while Prim was carrying an ultra-bright flashlight in her hands, which was just as well, as the couple could not see very well. It was very dark. All of a sudden a flash of something ran past them, and then it stopped to look at them. Prim nearly screamed, but was shocked to see it was Smudge, who was carrying in his mouth the dead body of an enormous rat. He looked surprised to see his owners walking through the field at night, but he trotted away with his quarry, giving them no second thought. "Smudge scared the living daylights out of me," said Prim, shuddering. "No doubt there'll be a murder scene under our bed when we get back home. Blood all over the place, a tail, a decapitated head. Just lovely. This looks like a very good evening," she said sarcastically.
"Don't be like that, Prim. Smudge is a great ratter. He's keeping down the rat population for us."
"That is a maybe. But does he need to decorate our house with his macabre quarry the whole time? The other day I got into the shower, and let's just say it was not pretty."
The inauspicious night sky was cloyingly dark, as if the stars, like snails on the seashore, had buried themselves in the depths of the tenebrific veil, like mischievous kids playing hide-and-seek. Even the moon appeared to be tucking her pearly face under a black eiderdown, as if she'd suddenly become rather self-conscious, or maybe she knew what Prim and Big Bear were about to do, and had turned away her rounded bright head in disgust. It was uncomfortable for Prim and Big Bear, traipsing across the field in the black of night, their walking boots grazing the ground and twisting the grass beneath the soles of their boots. They could hear the cheerful chorus of frogs and crickets serenading the night, as they made their way towards a tall congregation of lofty trees. But these reassuring nightly pleasantries did little to put their minds at ease, as both were dreading the daunting unpleasant task that lay ahead of them. This was a job that would make cleaning up a block toilet seem like a walk in the park. The woodgrove was hauntingly airy at night, and Prim had never explored their property at this crazy time, nor would she wish to venture out at the witching hour like this. It was not that she was suspicious or believed in ghosts, but she didn't like feeling vulnerable when you can't see anything around you. They heard a thunderous flapping sound of powerful wings soaring above them, and the cries of an owl that made Prim almost jump out of her skin with fright. The trees in the grove no longer looked beguiling and unthreatening like they had during the day. Instead, they looked menacing and sinister, like hooded monsters with gnarled arms that could potentially reach out and grab you. The breeze seemed to have picked up significantly. It whistled, and the wind began to shake the boughs of the trees. So leaves rustled, branches creaked, the forest groaned. Ostensibly every sound that the couple heard made them become more and more discomposed. They moved stealthily towards the clearing, and Prim got the profound sense that they were being followed. Big Bear must have heard the ominous sound, for he occasionally stopped and looked back into the trees, taking the flashlight from Prim's hand. He said, "What's that? Did you hear those branches snapping, Prim? I think someone might be following us." But nothing was ever there. "I think I'm just freaking out," said Big Bear, sounding annoyed with himself. "Silly old me," he scolded. "I'm hearing things that aren't even there. Unfortunately, the wind is rather feisty tonight." "I'm sure it's nothing," said Prim, trying to put her husband's mind at ease. But she was pretty sure that the Bigfoot she knew imposed no threat, was very likely following them. Maybe he wanted to know what they were getting up to, as Prim could sense they were being watched by a pair of steely eyes. It was not easy navigating their way down the obtrusive, unfriendly woodland trail in the middle of the night. It was hauntingly airy. Dark shadows swaddled them from every side, and the scenery and brambles seemed to brush past them, and they were so inconspicuous you could barely see them at all. Prim ended up getting clawed by some thorny briars that would make Smudge's claws seem almost blunt. "I hate the dark," she whispered to her husband. "It's so creepy in here, walking in the woods at night. It's really scary. I never expected it to be this intimidating." They heard a large howl, and Prim almost dropped her torch in terror, her eyes widening. "What the hell is that?" "I think it's a coyote," said Big Bear.
Calm down, Prim. Everything at night sounds bad because it's dark.
I don't know, said Prim. I'm sorry, but if I heard that sound during the day, it would be equally as scary. At one point, Prim fell over a gnarled-looking root that trespassed bulgingly through the ground, throwing her onto her feet. She felt a sharp shooting pain going right through her foot and realized at once that she'd twisted her ankle.
Are you all right?
Asked Big Bear, giving her a hand, pulling her to her feet.
I warned you to be careful. Stumbling around in the darkness like a blind mouse is not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you. There are lots of officious meddlesome roots plunging through the ground here.
I'll be all right, said Prim. She could feel the intense throbbing sensation in her ankle. She brushed away the leaves and the dirt from her sweatpants, but she knew better than to complain. She was quite certain Big Bear would love nothing better than to abandon this project. She hobbled a little awkwardly and then began to walk more steadily, and when she glanced over her shoulders, she saw a dark head and a pair of bright yellow eyes staring at her. She was right. The Bigfoot was watching them. But suddenly she felt amazingly calm, as if she had a profound sense that the Bigfoot was watching over them. She unequivocally knew that this gargantuan creature was harmless, but she wouldn't mention him to her husband, who might not take her revelations very kindly, especially if she told him they were being stalked by a Bigfoot. When they arrived at the clearing where the body was buried, both Prim and Big Bear gasped in astonishment. They observed the gravesite had been covered with a beautiful arrangement of stones, as if it was some kind of grave marker. So there we are. That is the end of part 4 of our story tonight. Isn't it spectacular? What an exciting story. So we're really going to find out who is the deceased body buried on their land. It's a curious question. You're going to find the answer tomorrow night. So until next time, goodbye and good night.